So what I want to say is just to welcome you to another session of our All This Sainted Difference conversations, in which we get to explore the beauty and sometimes the mystery of some of the many African and African diasporic traditions that exist in the Western Hemisphere. And our will is to learn about these traditions, but that's been informed by none other than Robert Farris Thompson, who is, I think, one of the presiding spirits around all that we're up to. Thompson was a professor of African art down at Yale, and he once accompanied me on a visit up to Old Lyme. And at the end of his book, Face of the Gods, he wrote words that I've been repeating often recently. He wrote, "The beauty and the moral splendor in their expression reveal Afro-Atlantic faiths as world religions, never again to be considered cults, never again to be excluded from the calculus of world religious history. All this sainted difference is what God wants." Now, it turns out that Robert Farris Thompson, or RFT, as I call him, was a friend of our presenter today, Todd Ramon Ochoa, who is an associate professor of religion at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's the author of two really incredible books that I think often read like novels. It can be really hard to put them down sometimes. The first is Society of the Dead, Quita Mañaquita and Palo Praise in Cuba. And the second is A Party for Lazarus, 6 generations of ancestral devotion in a Cuban town. Just a little bit more than 2 years ago, I spent several weeks in Cuba attending ceremonies in Havana and Matanzas and Sagua, some of which were oriented around the tradition that Professor Ochoa will be talking about this evening, Palo. And his book, Society of the Dead, served as a kind of field manual for me as I was trying to understand some of what I was witnessing in those really complex and really fascinating rituals. So when I thought about someone who could speak about a Congo-derived tradition and who could speak in depth about Palo, I knew exactly who I wanted to ask. And I just want to say that I'm incredibly grateful to Professor Ochoa that he first even acknowledged an out-of-the-blue request from a stranger and from a church minister, no less. And then also that he said yes. I don't imagine that many church ministers are reaching out to experts on Palo for presentations on that, but he said yes, and I'm really, really grateful. I love his writing, but even more, I love what he's writing about. And so I am delighted to welcome Professor Ochoa to our sacred circle this evening. So Todd Ochoa, welcome, and know how honored we are by your presence with us. If I could, let me just read one quick, brief snippet from your latest book, A Party for Lazarus, in which somebody says to you, "Don't think you're just going to show up from Havana and party. I know how Ramón likes to party." So here we are. We're here to do some work, but it is fun, playful, and beautiful work, and we're just grateful that you are with us tonight. So thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Steve. That's a wonderful introduction. Thank you all for taking the time tonight to join in this conversation. It's a privilege to be asked. I was immediately delighted and happy to reply to Steve's message. By all means, call me Todd. If you want to join the folks I work with in Cuba, who Steve just cited, you can call me Ramón. Todd doesn't work in Spanish so well, so people just grab onto my middle name, and that's what I go by. I'm delighted. It's Steve, can you just repeat the name of this this colloquium or this circle of this series?
I've called it All This Sainted Difference, following RFT's beautiful phrase.
Yeah, so I think let's see if we can keep an eye on difference throughout the conversations and question and answer. I think that one of the challenges of what I'm going to talk about is just how different it is. And when we bump up against something that strikes you strangely, just remember that our task here is to embrace difference, at least for these couple of hours. you don't have to embrace it after that, but I would ask you to affirm difference, to reach deep when things get really different, and see where that takes us in our conversations. The religion, the practice, I'll call it a praise form that we're going to talk about today is called Palo. It's P-A-L-O, Palo. Palo means stick. Right off the bat, it would be the most straightforward translation. By the way, we're talking about Cuba. We're talking about contemporary Cuba. I'm a cultural anthropologist. That means that I travel to Cuba. I've been traveling to Cuba since 1992, and I meet people, I befriend people, I ask people to join in my research, and people often do. And through my research, what I do is I try to listen to people carefully and learn as much as I can about their particular relationships to religion, and about the religions themselves. So everything I say tonight is based on field work that I have done in Havana, Cuba, and also in the second book, A Party for Lazarus, in a little town in the countryside, a couple hours out of Havana. So the religion we're talking about, the praise form we're talking about, Palo, is Cuban made, Cuban shaped, came to be in Cuba, and it came to be particularly in Havana. The sources that brought Palo to be would be mostly the praise forms of Kongo people, Kongo people. Let me show you. I'm going to share my screen if I could. I'm not as I said, I am a cultural anthropologist. So I'm weak when it comes to history, but I'll refer us to the Slave Voyages website, which I strongly encourage you to check out on your own, slavevoyages.org. It's got all kinds of resources for the Atlantic slave trade, but its real strength is being able to track individual ships and the histories of individual ships and the cargo they had, their ports of entry, their ports of departure, the people they carried. And so it's a fantastic resource. I'm just going to use a couple of maps that they have just to orient ourselves geographically and culturally. You'll see here, I think I'm guessing that in your conversations with Elizabeth McAllister, you were probably talking about Rada, Vodou, a side of Vodou called Rada. And certainly in your conversations with Ivor Miller, you were talking about religions and cultures that come from this part of the African continent. And those of us who are scholars of Black Atlantic religions, of religions of the African diaspora, we kind of think almost in a binary way about the cultures and religions that come from West Africa and those that come from West Central Africa. And, for me and people who work in Brazil or Haiti, that's going to be really dominated by the culture of Bakongo people, people from, what is today Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo. People, drawn out of, the Congo River is an enormous, we're talking Mississippi level river. So the people, pulled out of West Central Africa were from all along the river, but, overwhelmingly from the coastal plain. And if you're, and those were people in the Bakongo sphere of influence. Not all were Bakongo. There were many, many, many linguistic communities around the Congo River. I can't zoom. Let's see if I can zoom here. No, I can't zoom in. No problem. There were all kinds of different communities around the Congo River Delta who were enslaved and brought to the New World. Let's see if I can change the the slide, but largely in the sphere of influence of Bakongo people, who were a politically, militarily, culturally dominant community until the middle of the 19th century, when their sovereignties, their political sovereignties, were destroyed by, ultimately destroyed by the European trade. Just looking at the key down here, we're looking at more than 5 million people pulled out of West Central Africa. Let me annotate and get rid of those. You'll see, this is the dates are 1500 to 1900. So it's it's a 400-year period. But people from West Central Africa, Kongo people, Bakongo people, Kongo influenced people were heavily brought to Brazil and also to Cuba, and ultimately to New Orleans and and Charleston and the Eastern Seaboard, not in the numbers that you see them brought to a place like Cuba or Saint-Domingue, which is Haiti, and Brazil. Let me see if there's just one more map I can use here. I need to move this. Yeah, just a little bit more of that, of the numbers. I don't think I can zoom in while I'm screen sharing, but here from West Central Africa, you're looking at 5,700,000 people trafficked to the New World. If you take these West African ports and you add up the numbers trafficked out of these different West African ports, they add up to a similar number, about 6 million people. So in places like Brazil, in places like Haiti, in places like Cuba, the combinations of enslaved people in terms of their ethnicities, their languages, their cultural backgrounds are pretty evenly split between West African and Congo people. So those of us who are scholars of Black Atlantic religions will often think in terms of West African and Central African, or West African and Congo influences, sources. I'll call them inspirations or resources. In the case of Cuba, it's really interesting. Let me just say, in the case of Havana, because the fieldwork that I do in the Cuban countryside, the praise that gets worked out in this little town is the West African cultures that comprise that that praise style, that praise form, those feasts. They're not heavily Yoruba in their sourcing, whereas in Havana, the West African footprint, the West African fingerprint is Yoruba, the people of what is today Nigeria. And in Havana, the West African, what should we call it? A very strong Yoruba influence exists in Havana. So Palo, which is Central African, which is Congo, came to be in Havana. I think the important things to keep in mind are that it came to be as an urban religion. And many of the people who were enslaved in Africa, both West African and Central African, were also urban people, enslaved from cities that were under siege, often under siege for years and years and years, which ultimately fell in warfare, and which yielded rafts of refugees and people who were, for the picking of those who were ready to enslave them. And so in the New World, on the Caribbean side of the Atlantic, in a place like Havana, you had a city coming to be, Havana, which was creating its own urban culture, which included the contributions of urban people from both West Africa, in the case of Havana, for reasons that we don't entirely understand yet, principally Yoruba people, and Bakongo people, people from what was the capital of the Congo kingdom, Bansa Congo. So Palo comes to be in Havana as an urban praise form. It comes to be in the 19th century. That will seem pretty late for those of us here in the US. By the time that what is it? It's about 1806 that the British outlaw the trade and start to police it on the high seas. And it's 1868, the end of the Civil War, that we have emancipation in the United States, with growing abolitionist energy in the United States, especially in the North, all through the 19th century. But in Cuba, it turns out that the 19th century is a period of tremendous growth of slavery. That is because, in large part, of the Haitian Revolution, which starts in 1790, and for 10 years struggles for independence, 14 years struggles for independence from France. But that struggle, that's a slave struggle, it's a slave uprising, essentially takes Haiti out of the world market for sugar, for indigo, and the hunger of Europe for those commodities, sugar and indigo principally, indigo to dye clothes, that pretty color of blue that was all the rage at the end of the 18th and all through the 19th century. It moves that market, it moves the production of those goods to other locales, and Cuba becomes a principal locale for especially the continuing production of sugar. So Cuba commits in the 19th century to the trade. It commits to continue bringing people from the west coast of Africa to Cuba, and populations of enslaved people in Cuba spike in the 19th century. Emancipation in Cuba is also 30 years later than full emancipation, is 30 years later than the United States. So, active official emancipation begins in 1890. And it's a gradual emancipation. It goes till ultimately 1898, when Cuba finds itself embroiled in the Spanish-American War. All of that is to say that this religion we're talking about today, Palo, Congo-inspired, is urban, and it's relatively recent in its coming to be. It's a 19th century religion. A last historical point, and that's to say that, interestingly enough, Congo and the Congo River Delta was one of the first places, however, that enslaved people were brought to Europe and the New World, is before 1500, before 1450s, 1470s, when Portuguese are exploring the west coast of Africa. It's Congo people who are some of the first Africans brought to Europe, brought to Portugal. And subsequently, Congo people are a part of the trade throughout its 400-year history in greater or lesser numbers. But where the trade went and where European colonialism went, there were probably Congo people enslaved and part of that European expansion, European colonialism, and those European projects. So Palo comes to be in the 19th century, and it's coming to be, like any slave religion, like any religion of the enslaved, in an intimate and intensive conversation with the religion of the enslaving culture, and that is Spanish Catholicism. And so as this religion is taking shape, it has Spanish Catholicism to contend with as an authorizing religion, as an authorizing system, you could say, of what can be done, what can't be done, what can be known, what can't be known, what is proper behavior, what is redemptive behavior, what is improper behavior. So it's really trying to understand Spanish Catholicism. It's got a leg up because that Congo River Delta and that coastal plain around the Congo River Delta was colonized by Portuguese for 300 years. And so Congo people are familiar with Catholicism. They understand it. They understand Portuguese Catholicism. So there are cultural elements of Catholicism among enslaved people when they arrive in a Catholic port and in a Catholic community, which in this case is Havana. So there's already some priming going on there. Again, a leg up, which maybe the West African people the Yoruba, in the case of Havana, who were enslaved and brought to Havana, didn't have that leg up, didn't have that, what would we call it, that priming. So Bakongo people are having to contend with Catholicism as an enslaving religion. They're also having to contend with the religion of their slave companions, of their enslaved companions. And again, in the case of Havana, this is largely Yoruba people. Now, these two cultures, Yoruba and Kongo, have to negotiate with one another. And Yoruba representing West Africa. This coming together of African cultures, West African and Central African, is seen, especially where large numbers of people from each of these communities were brought and enslaved. I'm thinking about Brazil, and I'm thinking about Haiti, and I'm thinking about Cuba. When large numbers of each of these two large geographically located cultures were brought together in the New World, they entered into negotiation with each other. And it's really interesting, if you're a scholar of these things, to see the way that negotiation, what resulted of that negotiation religiously, cosmologically, you could say, in different places. How did this get worked out in Brazil, for example? How did it get worked out in Haiti? How did it get worked out in Cuba? And in Cuba, in Havana, that Kongo and Yoruba contact worked out definitely in an alliance, and with many affinities. Principally and foremost, I would say two major priorities. The first, and really important, is the ability to continue venerating those powers that are most sacred to you. That is, and the second priority is liberation. The second priority is to overturn the condition of enslavement, to somehow get out of this situation. Along the way to ultimate emancipation is going to be making things better along the way. Solutions to the everyday afflictions of enslavement, illness, marginalization, debt, degradation, physical abuse, family fragmentation, powerlessness. So both the West African and the Central African, both communities have these as their similar priorities. Now, it turns out that they have very different ways of seeing the world. The Yoruba and the Kongo, and the Kongo inspired, the Yoruba inspired and the Kongo inspired. Let me go to my, let me do this quickly. I'll try to see if I can't go to my, I'll use a screen share. I'm going to go to overhead to a document camera that I have. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. In terms of these two cultures, we'll call them sources, we'll call them inspirations, resources. Havana saw the birth of two religions in the 19th century, Palo, that we're talking about today, and Ocha, which is short for Oricha. And Oricha means spirit or divinity. Today, you'll hear this referred to as Santeria, or colloquially in Havana as Santo. So just to lay out the difference between these two, Ocha is largely Yoruba. Both of these are Havana-based religions, and they have some legs outside of Havana, but Havana is their mutual stronghold. Whereas Palo is Bakongo, Bakongo inspired. Yoruba, so this would be, Nigeria and its geographical environs, and Bakongo would be the Congo River Delta. That's where these people come from. Yoruba people, this is now where things start to diverge really in terms of their cosmologies, their religions. Yoruba are focused on divinity. So that would be religious entities that we would be familiar with from monotheism or Christianity. Something like gods and goddesses. Having, the attributes of a divinity. First names, proper names, histories, genealogies, specific powers, powers of creation, powers to intervene in the lives of mortal people, immortality to begin with. And so this is, if you want to think about how to connect to the Yoruba understanding of the cosmos of the world, something like the classical religions of ancient Greece and Rome. So in Havana, the Yoruba come up with a pantheon of roughly 8 gods and goddesses. Over on the Congo side, now remember, these are communities that are negotiating with each other for all kinds of things. First and foremost, the affirmation of their spiritual priorities. For the Congo, it is ancestors. Ancestors, something you might call ancestrality, which is to say the priority of ancestors in your life. Another way of thinking about ancestors would be spirits of the dead. Now, the Yoruba, it's not that the Yoruba don't have a strong emphasis on the dead as well, but certainly when you come to Havana and you start to negotiate with Catholics in the Catholic world, it's going to be the spirits, the Oricha, who are these gods and goddesses, who come to distinguish this emerging religion of Santeria or Ocha. Whereas Palo is going to stick to its dead. It's going to strive for its dead and center its choices and its actions on vouchsafing the ability to have a personal relationship with the dead, specifically with your own ancestors, those who guarantee your kinship, those who guarantee your family, those who give you a sense of being intimately in the world. Now, these two choices are gonna have consequences when it comes to how each of these religions, these emerging religions, are received by Catholics. The Catholic order, which is the enslaving order, this business of divinities and pantheons and gods and goddesses, call them saints, is going to make more sense to the Catholic world. And in fact, the Yoruba and those who are inspired by them in Havana in the 19th centuries recognize that kinship. They recognize that affinity and they start to work it to gain a kind of recognition from the enslaving order. That recognition giving them certain kinds of latitude to go about their priorities, which are praise of the divinities and the alleviation of the indignities of enslavement. Think about what a priority on spirits of the dead is going to look like for the Catholic order. The Catholic Church, historically, has had a monopoly on a relationship with the dead. The Catholic Church has interposed itself successfully since its beginning, between the living and the dead. And to have a community of enslaved people that insists on a personal relationship with the dead is a really scary thing. And so where Catholicism wasn't keen to either of these religions and would have preferred that neither of them came to be, and neither of them got legs, you could say. But between the two, it found Palo much more threatening, much more frightening. And so that led to Kongo people having to make really fateful choices. The most fateful choice being to choose their dead and to choose a way of being in the world that affirmed the dead before any other kind of divinity at the expense of even greater marginalization by the Catholic order. It was a bold and risky choice. In a place like Haiti, which you had you came into orbit around when you talked with Elizabeth McAllister, these two communities, these two ways of seeing the world, they merged in Vodou, and Vodou absorbed them both. Voodoo absorbed them both. Where the Loa, in the case of Vodou, that is the heart and the public face of Vodou. Whereas the Congo side of Vodou is what Hollywood tends to accent, and what the popular imagination imagines about the Congo side of Vodou. The packets, the charms, the sorcery, the zombie. Don't lose sight of the fact, thinking about zombie, that zombie are the dead. Zombie are the dead. There's either the zombie astral, which is the principal kind of zombie, which is basically a spirit, and the zombie cadaver, which is the zombie we imagine from Hollywood. Both of them are spirits of the dead. That is going to be a Congo affirmation, a Congo assertion, a Congo insistence. And of course, just like the Congo accent on the dead scandalized the Catholic order in Cuba in the 19th century, it scandalizes us. And that's why zombie and anything undead has tremendous, has tremendous force in our popular culture, in Hollywood. We can come to an understanding of what Catholics were making of a Bakongo religion when we just think about our own attraction repulsion relationship to zombie films in Hollywood. Consequently, and I'll finish up this back and forth between Santeria and Palo. Consequently, in the struggle for remediation, in the struggle for transformation within enslavement, you could think of Santo as having a kind of diplomatic relationship to the Catholic, a diplomatic relationship to the Catholic order. One where there's actually a conversation that could be had, because each one of these orisha is actually connected to a Catholic saint. And Catholics can have a sense that, oh, they may be praising their divinities, but at least they understand them to be like our saints, or to be subordinated to our saints. The Palo side of things would be the military branch of this struggle. Often you will see in struggles for emancipation, the diplomatic and the military. Think about, you all are in the colonial United States. Jefferson, the diplomatic in Paris, and Washington, the military side of the struggle. And you see this time and again. And so in the New World, this is the flavor or the style that each of these religions took on. Like so much of diplomacy, Santo is understood to be cool. Cool and steady, whereas Palo is understood to be hot and dangerous. Like many things diplomatic, this is more public, and this is more secret. By virtue of having to protect your options. Hot, cool, public, secret. Okay, that's going to be our basic setup. What we're left with in thinking about Congo inspirations or Congo influences in the New World is this side of the equation. a religion, a community that is choosing the dead and choosing strategies that place it time and again in more dangerous positions and drive it to secrecy in order to maintain its priorities. Let me briefly just give you a sense of that Kongo worldview, that Kongo sovereignty that Palo struggled for. For those of you who've read Thompson, you'll recognize it. Steve will recognize this from Thompson. There is a classic Kongo, call it a cosmogram, a symbol that represents the Kongo world order. The really basic distinction is between the world of the living and the world of the dead. That is the cosmos. I think you should notice that the dead here are below the living. You could take this literally in terms of a vertical relationship. The living are understood to be moving about the earth and to have right next to them, immediately underfoot, their ancestors. And if not their immediate ancestors, unknown dead from their community who can be allied with. Life, in a sense, begins at 6 a.m., which would be birth, finds its noon, which would be spiritual maturity. That would be for most of us, somewhere between 50 and 70, when we're at our absolute strongest in terms of our intellect and our spiritual resources. And then a decline to 6 p.m., which is death. And then life proceeds. Maybe we can't use the word life. Maybe we have to use the word presence. Maybe we have to use the word influence. Maybe we have to use the word agency. But a person's agency, a person's influence, a person's possibilities do not end with death. They continue, in fact, to grow as one joins the dead. It is now within this Kongo cosmos, this Kongo sovereignty, let's call it. Sovereignty, I think about just like, something like self-determination. The sovereignty of a nation to determine its course. The sovereignty of a people to determine its course. The Kongo self-determination, Kongo spiritual sovereignty insists that the living create points of contact with the ancestors. What Palo insists on, what Palo righteousness, what Palo praise is about, it's about building these points of contact, building these linkages between the living and the dead, between us and our ancestors. A word about the term Palo. Palo means stick, but it also means tree. And trees are understood to have rooted, intensive contact with the dead. And the power of the dead is understood to be accessible through the energy that they bring to trees. In fact, in Cuba, and I don't know to what, I know this is not the case in Mexico, let's say, just to the same degree, or in Colombia, but in Cuba, the word palo means tree as well as stick. And obviously the sticks are here in the branches, but the whole tree is understood as palo. And so the very name of the religion is referencing this priority of access to the dead, of connection to the dead, through these magnificent organisms that reach their roots into the land of the dead, into the space of the dead. Just as a tiny side note, these ancestors, a ton of Palo work. You find yourself in the community of a healer, of an expert in Palo lore and Palo knowledge. Those communities are small, perhaps the size of this group here today. They gather in the home of a healer who has a good understanding of Palo and its wisdom. And what those communities will do is work really hard to reintegrate the living with their dead. The first thing a Palo healer will ask a client, who then becomes an apprentice, is to name their dead. This happened to me in Cuba when I started my field work. The woman who ultimately became the central figure, ultimately my teacher, the first thing she asked me is, name your dead. Name your dead. And coming out of Anglo-Protestant, Lutheran, rural Michigan, I struggled. I was like, and now mind you, I was about 25, and less than 6 years earlier, my father had died. I should have just said Raul Ochoa. I should have just said it, right, Raul? And then his oldest child, my half-brother, also named Raul Ochoa, had recently died. Both people who were beloved to me. But I didn't have them on the tip of my tongue. It wasn't a culturally trained response of mine. And when this teacher saw the way I struggled to name my father, my half-brother, my grandmother, my grandparents, she was like, you're sick. You are ill because you don't have a living, intimate memory of your dead with you at all times. And my job as a healer is to get you back connected to your dead, so that when you hit obstacles on a daily basis, you lean on your dead. You think back to the lessons they taught you. You think back to their wisdom, and that this is not a second or third tier kind of response to adversity. It's your first tier. And this is Palo's priority, to reintegrate and to foster an intimate connection between the living and the dead. Absolute priority. And that is a reflection of those choices that Kongo and their affiliates and those they inspired. It's the same choice that was made by those enslaved people when they had to decide whether to join the Yoruba, whether to subordinate to the Yoruba, whether to give up their sovereignty to Yoruba priorities, whether to give it all up to Catholic priorities. And in Havana, Kongo people said, I'm sticking with what I know, with my dead, and I want my sovereignty, my ability to make those choices. Very consistent to the present day. How do we connect? How do we connect to our dead? I'll finish up and open a topic to conversation. Open it to questions, and hopefully I can say more about it in the question and answer. This way of living in the world, these priorities, these choices, again, were very threatening to the Catholic way of seeing the world, which had a divinity far, far above. Let's just say, divinity is here, divinity is up, and what lay below was mostly bad, was to be suspect. Certainly any dead that were below were either to be worked for in terms of their redemption, or were lost. And so to have this be the principal activity that you're engaged in, intimate, first person relationships with your own dead without the church, this was a scary thing to have in your community. Now, the Congo saw that. remember this military versus diplomatic idea. The Congo saw it. They saw that Catholics were upset, that Catholics were scandalized, that Catholics were afraid. In 19th century Cuba, of anybody who was getting involved with their dead without the church's authorization of that. And rather than excuse themselves and try to present a masked face, the Congo and through Palo doubled down and said, oh, you're afraid of the dead? Well, the dead is what we do. Now deal with it. And where that, mind you, now from the Catholic point of view, and even from the Yoruba point of view, the Yoruba had a strong relationship with the dead. But the way that Palo engaged the dead, which is not a, if you think about religions throughout the world or human communities throughout the world, a very common way of engaging the dead, was scandalous to both Yoruba and Havana and Catholics. And that was by actually handling the remains of the dead, actually handling and keeping human remains in order to be in contact, in domestic contact, household contact with the dead. You don't have to go far from monotheism to find local communities burying their dead under doorsteps, keeping their dead nearby, keeping their dead in a place where they can be accessed, where they can be spoken to, where they can be dressed and undressed and cared for. But in a European city, in a colonial city like Havana, urban, cosmopolitan, enlightened, this was taking it to another level. And as a result of it, Palo received the stain, the mark of sorcery. What are these people doing? How can they be in this kind of relationship with the dead? Anybody who does this has to be a witch. This is a tried and true specter, certainly of Catholicism, but as you know, being there in the Northeast, of all Christianity, the figure of the witch, the one who has an unauthorized, personal, independent relationship with a power that could challenge divinity. The only power that could challenge divinity is the mass, the collected mass of the dead. And that brought Palo the mark of the witch and the mark of sorcery. Mind you, just like they did when they defended their dead and made that choice, Palo didn't hide. It didn't double down. It didn't put on a mask. It said, okay, if witch is what you call us, then witch is what we are. If sorcery is what you call us, then sorcery is what you are. Deal with it. And the last thing I'll say is to really accent that, to really show Catholics how committed they were to that. Palo and Paleros, those who made Palo, discovered in the Catholic stories, in the Catholic worldview, they discovered a privileged moment in the Catholic mythology, in the Catholic cosmos. And that was the couple of days each calendar year which Catholics observed with utter devotion when divinity dies, when divinity is killed. And that's Good Friday and Saturday until Resurrection Sunday. And on those couple of days, Palo claimed its place. It said, you're afraid of us because we're sorcerers, because we praise the dead. well, we are going to praise the hardest when your God is dead. And when your God is dead, we are going to party. Think about the challenge that poses to a Catholic worldview. When your God dies, we praise the hardest. That choice was so bold and so strange that even the Yoruba in Havana had to distance themselves from it. And to this day, in Havana, starting today, all religious artifacts in a home that practices Santeria are covered with a white sheet, and they are left to rest and be protected by that white sheet until Resurrection Sunday. On the other side, those things in the household that are Kongo inspired, that are Palo inspired, get brought out. And they get enlivened through libations, they get gifts given to them, they have drums played for them, and all those Kongo intensities are worked up during this week and certainly going into Good Friday and Resurrection, and Saturday. Okay, I'm gonna leave it there. There's so much more to say, but I am well into my time, and I am eager to hear your questions. I'll stop my share.
Well, Todd, I just want to say thank you for that incredible presentation. And I had my camera off and I was scribbling notes. Man, that is one of the most eloquent presentations on Yoruba, Congo, and all of the ways in which Palo developed in relation to Catholicism. That was a brilliant explanation. So thank you for that introduction. Thank you for that powerful presentation. I think we're all just privileged to be able to hear and to learn from you today. So thank you for that. I do want to open it up to conversation and to questions, but I'm wondering, one of the things I was I was wondering if you would be willing to share is like what might a ritual look like, say on Good Friday, on Holy Saturday? What if we were in Havana or its environs on a week like this, what might we see or experience?
Well, if you Rebecca was talking before we all got together about her time in Haiti, and this time of year, hearing the drums, lots of drums during this Lenten period. This week in Havana, if you heard drums at all, it would be Palo. You can be walking down the street in Havana at any time and hear drums in the distance, and it's people celebrating their Orisha, also called their saints. It could be Palo. You have to know the music you can tell by the drums and the beat what it is. But you wouldn't even have to guess or try to go into your knowledge. If it's drums at this week in Havana, it's Congo. In general, a Palo ritual involves a relationship to a receptacle, and often either a metal cauldron, again playing with that European fantasy of the witch. So the cauldron was redeemed from the from the domestic life of enslaved people, but also from the European fear of what is done with cauldrons. In a cauldron which has been sanctified by a community, charged, it's called being charged, principally with earth from a cemetery, anything that can bring the community into intimacy with the dead. That cauldron will contain earth from a cemetery, human remains, powerful sticks to echo the idea of the palo, of the stick, sticks from particular trees with characteristics and healing powers, or herbal medicine, you could say, to put it in more accessible terms. So this cauldron is large enough to hold a human skull, that is the privileged human remains, earth to cover it so it's not visible, sticks protruding from it. Different scholars like Thompson or someone like David Brown, who works on Santeria, have described it as a forest in the miniature. Thompson will call it a reconstituted grave. And this is brought forward. It has a proper name. And it's offered gifts, things like bottles of rum or jars of honey, candies, foodstuffs, which are very precious. Any food is precious in Havana right now. Also, the blood of sacrificial animals is offered to one of these receptacles. And so a ritual scene will involve this receptacle being brought forth. It's never kept in a visible place in a home, always kept in a hidden place. But a ritual will involve bringing it forward, gathering drums, gathering a community, and singing it up, singing. It's all music, learning the songs that elevate this one individual receptacle. And every community will have one or more, and they're all different. That's what separates them from divinities. In a Santeria ritual, an object will come forward and it'll be called a god or a goddess. And that same goddess, like Yemaya, will be in every Santeria home. And it'll be a Yemaya. And you'll know how to relate to that Yemaya because she's a goddess and she has her priorities. But in a Palo ritual, each one of these receptacles is a separate entity and has its own history has its own stories. And so a community comes around this receptacle to learn the stories, to sing it up, and ultimately to seek its help. That idea of redress for affliction is, you will not have a Palo ritual that isn't about connecting to the dead, finding your ancestors, reaffirming your relationship to the ancestors, and asking for their help right now, in this moment, today. And expecting, mind you, a response today. It's not like, oh, I'll ask a god and we'll see if tomorrow, the day after, maybe next year. No, if the dead are with us, like underfoot, or if you manage to sing them up in the room with you, they should be able to respond now. And so that is what Apollo praise feast will involve. Any sacrificed animals will be cooked and prepared and then eaten together. The blood goes to the receptacle and to the dead, but the meat goes to the community. And so what is a singing, dancing, drumming, gathering ultimately becomes a feast, which involves eating this, what has become a sanctified animal in the course of its sacrifice. They can last anywhere from 6 hours to 2 or 3 days.
Wow. Oh, to be able to witness or to be able to participate in such a ritual. I know you've participated in many of these rituals, and you've described them incredibly well in Society of the Dead. Yes. Let's open it up to others. I'm going to see if you all have questions. Laura is writing one in, but Laura, why don't you just unmute and ask your question?
Yeah. Okay. So I so many questions, but I'm curious about if there is a timing factor related to when someone has died, or because it's around Good Friday in particular, it's an annual point of connection, or I've recently lost someone, let's say, and I need to connect with them. I need to feel their energy. I didn't know if there was a role there.
Very much so, especially if if a community is healthy, which is to say that there are there's more than one teacher or healer or leader. There are several, and the authority for teaching is distributed between several people. There are many community members or initiates. Then the dead who are being praised will have been part of the community. Now, there's a mourning period. It's interesting. There's a numerology of the dead, and this comes from Catholicism, and the number is 9. 9 is the number of the dead. 3 threes. And in the Catholic world, the mourning period is called a novena, a 9.
Right.
And people will be in mourning and engage in some places relate to the corpse of the deceased. I'm thinking about, right off the top of my mind, Highland, Peru, for 9 days before, with the corpse laid out for public relation. At the end of this, public relation. It's like a long wake. It's a protracted wake for 9 days. And so similarly in Palo, that number 9 is respected, but the relationship to the dead is as intimate as that, that 9 days of a corpse laid out for relationship, for mourning, for memorializing, for that's what Palo seeks to sustain long after the corpse is gone. And so anniversaries are going to be sacred to the community. And ancestors are, now that's the timing question. Ancestors are invoked at every ritual. And so you can't go in without asking for the permission of the dead. And each of us, we would call it a silent prayer, but each of us is calling our dead when we're gathered together to invite them in to join us together, to be together for this period of, whatever it's going to be, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, 36 hours that we're going to be drumming and singing together. In terms of Good Friday, the individual spirits of the dead are understood to be taking a more of a spectator role, and powerful non-Catholic spirits of the dead are asked to go to work on, between at 6 p.m. The mythology is that Christ dies at 6. I don't know how that aligns with Catholic orthodoxy, but Christ dies at 6 p.m. In Palo logic, Christ dies at 6 p.m. and then Christ rises at 6 a.m. on Sunday. So between 6 p.m. on Friday and 6 a.m. on Sunday, really non-Catholic, and that is going to mean non-baptized spirits of the dead are asked to go to work. Most of the ancestors in that room were baptized. Everybody in that room is baptized. So the spirits of the dead that are invoked and worked up on Good Friday and into Saturday can only move, can only operate, only have active agency, vitality, if they're not baptized, because baptism is the authority of God. Baptism is the stamp of God. It's the hand of God. And if God is dead between 6 p.m. Friday and 6 a.m. Sunday, you've kind of lost your moxie. You've lost your energy. You need other spirits of the dead to come forward and do that work for you.
That's cool.
Hold on. So Becky, I know you're waiting to get in, but I see Joseph Kazadi has a hand up. So Joseph, I want to recognize you. And I just want to say, by way of introduction to Todd, Joseph actually comes to us from Congo and is an esteemed member of our community. So, so Joseph, yeah, jump in.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very interested, and thanks Laura to invite me. And everything he said about the people of Congo, it's truth. Because like I already said, Congo, we have a lot of tribes, okay? And till now, people of Congo, they have they're special according to the spiritual way. So we have most of the times there is it's called Simon Kimbangu. He's one leader from Congo. He was against Catholic because Catholic, they came with slavery. Even now, if we try to go deeper, talk about slavery, most of the times Catholic Church put the border because they knew that they hurt Congolese people. So we have, like Laura asked about timing to talk with death. So in each village is like everywhere. We have those kind of people. Here we can call them medium, but in Congo we have people with this kind of power. So even if you are sick, even there is war, so they are able to communicate with our ancestor. And right now we witness the answer. So from the Catholic, it's a mistake, but for Congolese people, they know that this is our way to worship our ancestors. So from like me, I'm Muluba. So for us, we only believe in one God. So we don't have a spirit of death. So it's different way in Congo, according to East, North, and West. But for back Congo, because a lot of slavery came from there, till now, the Catholic Church over there is hard people. They are not strong because of the things they did before independence, especially when they killed Simon Kimbangu. I'll send the name. You'll see, you Google that name. So he was a very leader, he was popular. So he was killed by Catholic Church because he stand against slavery, he stand against religions. So in that moment, it was very dangerous for him. And that's the thing. So, like, we have people, they communicate. Even you can see like the trees. You can communicate with trees and you see things happen. So it's very mystic. And from our, like me, I'm Christian, I avoid this kind of things because it's contact with mystique, the dead people. But the people who trust, and you can see the answer right now if you just call the name upon the name of your ancestor, and you will see the result. So that's what I wanted to emphasize. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. I'll just say a couple of things. Those mediums or those channelers that Joseph is mentioning are what a Palo healer is. They're a person who has a lot of expertise and confidence and a certain experience in handling communications with the dead. Because for those of us who aren't used to communicating with our dead on a regular basis or hearing from them, it's a very disorienting thing to be engaged in, and to have the expertise of someone who's walked that path and knows how to manage it is as a tremendous resource. And so I think I just want to accent that in what Joseph said. The other thing I'll say is about the trees and the mysticism. The ancestors of the dead who are lost, which is to say, I mean, some of us are great at genealogy and we can really take it back to whenever, to the Mayflower or something. But for many of us, we can do about 3 generations, 4 generations, and suddenly it all fades out. Those faded out ancestors become what are called Simbi, S-I-M-B-I, Simbi, not too different from zombie. And Simbi reappear among us as a twist in the branch of a tree, a knot in the side of a tree. If you've ever been walking in a walk in your local wherever park, reserve, state park, and a knot on a tree looks like a face to you, that's Simbi. That's Simbi. And if you trip on a root, well, that's Simbi. That root is a little elbow or shoulder poking up on the ground, and that's Simbi sending you a message. You don't know which ancestor it was, but it's one among the dead who has erupted into the world and is presencing here. And a healer, like Joseph mentioned, will really know how to connect with Simbi and work with Simbi and put you into contact with Simbi. Before I go to Susan, I'll just say this last thing, which is a really important takeaway. Anytime you hear the word animism, which is hard to, what is animism, right? It means that like the trees are alive, or it means that like the fish are alive, or what is animism? in my experience, in terms of my work in Cuba and also as a scholar of religion, animism isn't without the dead, which is to say that animism is actually ancestor veneration. And the energy in the world, the energy in those plants or trees or stones, is because the ancestors are dwelling there. And I think that is really consistent across many, 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 many cultures and across thousands and thousands of years of human history. So animism and the dead are really closely linked.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Joseph. Susan.
Well, hold on. I want to.
Yeah.
I think Becky chimed in
Oh.
earlier. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna stick to the order. So Becky, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was curious in Palo if there's particular care of the dead at the time of their death with their funeral and the party afterwards. It seems in Haiti there's a fear of the dead. If they're not cared for properly and buried properly with a party and the whole thing, then there's some fear of the dead. And I wondered if that was similar in Cuba, in Palo.
It is, but one of the things that's really amazing about Palo and about Ocha, Santeria, and about the Abacoa, which Ivor Miller was talking with you about some weeks ago. These were religions that were persecuted and feared under Spanish colonialism. They had a kind of heyday in the first 50 years of the 20th century. They were still feared by white society, but Catholic rule had ended after 1898 in Cuba. And until 1959, until the revolution of 1959, these religions existed as, as marginal artifacts at the boundaries of polite white society in a place like Havana. But when the Cuban Revolution comes to power, it's an atheist revolution. It becomes more and more militant as it goes along. That's 59. By 68, it is really hard to be a person of faith, whether you're Catholic, whether you're evangelical, any kind of Protestant, any kind of the African religions, and everybody goes underground. Everybody goes underground. So properly burying your dead as a Catholic person is a risky thing to do in Cuba after 1968. Risky, not in the sense that you're going to be jailed, but every value of society is stacked up against you. And if you're a young parent hoping to get your child into a music lesson, they had better not have a mark next to them on their, on their file that they actually are Catholics and practice. They haven't left Catholicism. The revolution ranked religions in terms of their distastefulness. And at the very bottom of the list, it was Palo. And mind you, there was one religion that was even more distasteful than Palo. I wonder if you can guess it. Throw your guesses in the chat. And it's a religion that's not an African-inspired religion. It is a monotheistic religion that surely is practiced in Old Lyme today. It's certainly practiced here in Chapel Hill. And I'm curious if you can throw your guesses into the chat.
Judaism.
No. Good guess. Especially because Palo has a secret alliance with Judaism. So Palo is next to last, in part because it's secret alliance to Judaism, but it's not Judaism. It's Jehovah's Witnesses.
Jehovah's Witness, yeah.
And that is because Jehovah's Witnesses refuse to serve in the military. And the Cuban Revolution is a military culture, if there ever was one. And to not serve in the military is to really sell your country out. And so people who practice Palo, they'll serve in the military. And so, Rebecca, your question is, you can't even put together a righteous funeral for Catholicism. So to do it for Palo is even harder because you've got to get drums in the room because you need the corpse for more than a few hours. the Cuban government, the public health authorities, just like anywhere else that's a, rational, enlightened, modern state, is going to want to collect that corpse right away and get that corpse onto a coroner's table, into a funeral parlor, properly boxed up and sent off to the cemetery. And Palo needs to be with the corpse for some time. It needs to sing to the corpse. It needs to drum for the corpse. The gathered need to be able to touch the corpse. But for decades, this couldn't be done. It was only done by the most, dyed in the wool. I don't care what the revolution says about me. I don't care what the consequences are for my family practitioners. And those were very few.
But
So
do they have fear? Is there fear involved?
for sure, to lose, mostly not because the ancestor will be angry. It's because you lose their wisdom and their protection.
Okay.
And to have an ancestor fade because they haven't been properly invoked, candles lit, offerings made, visits to the cemetery made on prescribed occasions according to a prescribed timeline, the gravesite kept clean, kept with flowers present, glasses of water kept filled in different numbers and in different quantities at different times in the calendar. If all this daily, monthly, yearly maintenance work, which is veneration of your particular dead, whoever that may be, your deceased grandparents, your deceased siblings, and it's not just kin, anybody who's touched you, who can be a resource to you, teachers, neighbors, mentors, even philosophers. I was delighted to add some of my favorite philosophers to my list of the dead because I think through them and I solve problems through them. So to have every one of these as a resource to you. Everyone has wisdom to give you, has serenity for you, has resources for you, and to have any of them fade out is a shame, and something to be feared, because invariably there is affliction in the world, and the dead are gathered around you, and the more tightly bound and in relationship to you they are, the more likely they are to actually fend off affliction for you. Everything from getting hit by a car to having an illness, COVID, to other kinds of affliction, heartbreak, debt, fraud, you name it. There's so many kinds of affliction that we all deal with. It's not just health. So that's the biggest fear.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Susan.
Hi, Todd. Thank you so
Susan.
much. This has been amazing.
You're welcome.
So I guess my question is, if I heard you correctly, you said that in Voodoo or Voodoo, it was the merging of these two, of Yoruba and Palo. And so I'm curious about today and the modern practice. And do modern practitioners know of these distinctions? And since, how can you say more about how the two have merged in Voodoo? And I'm curious about also practices in the US. And are we seeing 3 different types of practices, Yoruba still being practiced separately, Palo, and then also Voodoo, and how those all sort of come together?
Super question. It is like its own, like, whatever, we could do a semester course on it. In short, so I'll just bracket this by saying that the second book I wrote that Steve mentioned is in a little town outside of Havana, and the way that the African, I call them African inspirations, are praised there is a lot like Vodou. They're not called Loa, they're still called Orisha, but what really distinguishes this praise form in the countryside in Cuba is that both the Orisha, both West African powers, let's call them entities, the gods, the goddesses, and the dead are praised together. In Havana, this is not to be done. You do not mix Santeria with Palo ever. It is highly uncouth and ignorant to do it,
Mhm.
which is why when Havana people get out to the countryside and they see these people like doing what are recognizably Santeria songs up to a point in the festivities, and then very consciously announcing the switch into Congo without a break. The singer says, we're going to switch time, we're going to switch the metronome, where the metronome's going to move, the clock is going to shift, the beat is going to shift, and boom, everything shifts into Congo. Congo beats, Congo songs, Congo language. A Havana person is going to think this is a disaster.
Mhm.
This is not, don't mix these things, but that's what Haitian Vodou does as well. And in a full-on Vodou a feast, party, fete, you'll praise the Loa first, and this can go on for hours and hours and hours and hours. But at a certain point, the whole party will shift to what's called petuo, which means rock or hard. It'll go from soft to hard.
Mhm.
It'll go from rara, which is the divine-oriented Vodou, to hard Vodou, petuo Vodou, rocky Vodou, which is dead-focused Vodou. That's the Vodou that I was talking about that Hollywood is crazy about. But what's interesting there is the sequence. In both cases, the Cuban countryside and in Haitian Vodou, the priority goes to West Africa. The priority goes to divinities. They get sung to first, they get sacrificed to first, they get danced to. And it's only late in the festivities, when people are tired, when a lot of people have gone home, when a lot of children have gone home, when things shift to the hotter, harder, more dangerous Congo-inspired material. And so I've always been very interested in how both in Haiti and in the Cuban countryside, it wasn't Congo that came first. That both these communities decided to work with divinities and try to solve problems by appealing to divinities first. And then for those who want to remain, for those who want to go late, for those who are willing to bring it up a notch, we're going to shift over to the dead now. And so that's their basic combination. And it's a felicitous combination. Congo-centric people. So there are drummers, for example, when this switch happens, and I've never seen it in Haiti, but in the Cuban countryside, the singer will say, we're going to change the clock, we're going to change the clock, we're going to change the clock, which means we're going to change the timing. That singer's probably done singing because he doesn't know, or she doesn't know, the whole Congo repertoire. And now someone who knows the Congo repertoire will step forward. Same with drummers, same with dancers. And it's the same people, but my strengths are with the Orisha and one or two particular Orisha. And Susan's strengths are with this Congo stuff. And I'm just going to let her like hold forth for the next few hours. Now, Susan doesn't feel dissed because she had to wait till, 2 a.m. on night 2 of the feast, because what she's bringing is really different. Back to the saints' differences. She's bringing something really different. She's bringing something with a lot more possibility of making a change right now. And for anybody who's stuck around, that is an honor to that singer and to those people, that people are willing to give them that space. So it's really an alliance.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you just also just speak to the practice in the US today?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All of the above. So the Cuban community and diaspora, there's both Santeria, Ochoa in Miami, and also Palo, as well as in New Jersey. Anywhere there are Cubans, there are going to be both Santeria and Ochoa. And anywhere there are Haitians, there's going to be Vodou. And so that's also in Miami. It's also, in urban areas in the Northeast, urban areas anywhere. There's a great dissertation about Palo community in Minneapolis. San Francisco has a strong Palo community. There's Palo everywhere. But Palo is always in association with Santeria. You remember the hot on the one side and cool on the other. if your entrance into Afro-Cuban religion is through Palo, it is very likely that a conscientious healer will say, let's get you started in Santeria first, because it's cooler, it's fresher, and there's really identifiable, responsible parties in that cosmology that can take care of you if things get scary, and that's the gods and goddesses. And once you're initiated over there, then we'll bring you into this world. Again, that priority of the gods over the dead. I consider that to be a very Western concession at some level by Kongo people.
Mhm.
So anywhere there's Palo in the United States, there's going to be Santo nearby.
Mhm.
I have met very few people who are fluid in both Vodou and Afro-Cuban religion, who can manage it all. I have met a few people like that, and these religions and the people who practice them come into contact with each other, and people go from feast to feast, but they are very separate communities.
Great, thank you so much. This is really terrific.
Carlene.
Yeah, thank you. You've been a wonderful teacher. Just wonderful. If you're comfortable answering this, I wonder if you found, once you had identified your spiritual ancestors, once someone had helped you to do that, did you find that you'd already been in relationship with them without realizing it? And secondly, did your relationship to those ancestors become more enhanced once you realized
Yes.
that?
Yeah, it's one of the things I'm most grateful to my fieldwork for. When I started working with the woman who's the central teacher in both books, actually, because the second book, she asked me to come to her hometown to see this different way of doing religion, which is totally different from Havana. And I eventually agreed and wrote that second book with her. Yeah, when I first met her, this is Cuba. This is the Cuban Revolution, 1992. I said, look, this is my project, and I'm really interested in Palo. And she showed herself as a santera, as a santeria person, and did not display her Palo side at all. So I was like, maybe you can introduce me to some people. I'm not so interested in santeria. I'm interested in Palo and blah, blah, blah. And she was like, well, I do both. And so why don't you think about working with me? And I said, okay, but here's, this is a research project and et cetera, et cetera. The really important thing you need to know is that I'm an atheist. And she was like, no problem. In Palo, there are no gods in Palo. That theos is for real. I mean, it's atheism. But she says, do you have parents? I'm like, yep. Grandparents? Yep. Great-grandparents? Yep. There's nothing you need to believe. The facts are in your body. You are carrying these people in your genes. And I was like, yep. Now there's no reason that she appealed straight to my rationality. What was interesting is that my rationality had also distanced me from my dead. I think it's a very monotheistic thing. I think it's a very Protestant thing. Catholics have a more material, intimate, ritualized, elaborate relationship with the dead. Protestantism made that relationship even colder, it seems to me. Think about something like Calvinism. If we think about, Weber or something like that, predestination. Like you can't know if you're going to heaven or hell. And in fact, you can't know if your ancestors are in heaven or hell. You'll figure out when you get there. And between now and then, just get into your calling and, let the dead bury the dead. And that was very much both my religious and my secular formation. So when she's asking me to name my dead, and I'm like, and she's like, this is not good. And, it was really sweet. She was like, well, tell me about your father. She wanted to hear about my dad. Most people don't want to hear about my dead. It's an anecdote or two that you carry around about your parents. And most of us harbor this enormity of affection, history, stories inside us for our dead that we don't share with anybody because we don't want to seem depressive. We don't want to seem hung up. We don't want to seem like we're in some kind of unresolved, melancholic relationship to the dead. Mourn and get on with it. That's going to be the Freudian solution to being productive in society. And she was like, well, tell me another story. Tell me another story. Tell me another story. And there's a great, what would we call it? Piece of wisdom in Palo, which is that one story draws out another story. And once you get going, like, keep on going. And a healer, a good healer will hear you out and learn about your dead. And, oh, what about, who was his father? And it's like a genealogy session. Mind you, all of it with the motive of getting you into spiritual connection with these ancestors, which is different than genealogy, which is getting you into some kind of historical connection with your ancestors. And so I loved that. I just loved that. I loved my father. I missed my father died when I was 18, and I miss him to this day. I know, 50, 40 some years. I love him. And so to be able to chat him up and have someone care, and then to hear about his kid and my grandma on my mom's side, you know, like all that carrying on was sweet, very sweet. And I came back from that field work digging pictures out of drawers and asking my mom for a picture. And what's this kid up to? Why does he want these pictures? And he's hanging them up all over the place. And my family, you'll see the Ramon Ochoa there. My family's Mexican-American. It's not a Cuban-American, Mexican-American. And suddenly this kid who's been a lapsed Lutheran, militant atheist, some kind of Marxist, is now like making a Day of the Dead altar. Like, what happened to him? And, you know, I love that Day of the Dead altar. So, yeah, someone said here in the chat, sounds healing and integrating. Yeah, very much so. Very much so. So it's really a takeaway of mine. And anybody who, I'm often reached out to by people who are thinking about getting involved with Palo, and they've read my book and they want to know my thoughts. And my basic message is, you know, do this for your relationship with the dead. Like, it is a technology, it is a community for integrating with the dead. Don't do it for any other reason. Like, this is about you and your dead. And that should be your North Star. That should be, and, you know, teachers, healers, leaders, they come in all shapes and sizes. And we've all been brought in, let someone into our confidence and been betrayed by people. And this is going to be the sake in every religious community. And so that's why I say to people, I have no idea who you're talking to. I have no idea who the healer is that you're working with. But you can take from them ideas, thoughts, techniques, wisdom for being in a better relationship with your dead and having them more present in your life. Stick with your teacher and healer until you've gotten what you can from them, and then see where you're at.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Ted, do you want to ask your question?
Palo Monte and Palo Verde. I don't know. Ted, tell me about Palo Verde. It doesn't ring immediately. Ted, maybe you're muted out there in the world.
Out here in the Matrix.
Out here in the Matrix.
Yeah.
There are so many Palos in Palo.
Hmm.
And one of the things that was challenging when I left Cuba, my teachers were like, "Oh, you're gonna have to, you know, you're gonna have to practice Palo in New York." I was in New York when I did this field work, and I was like, "Okay, how do I do that? Like, what are the powerful trees in New York? I was in New York City. What are the powerful trees I can get in Central Park? Like oak, maple, sycamore. Do I want to put a dogwood into this? And like, what does a dogwood bring to this? It was a really rich exercise in the same kind of negotiation that Bakongo people had to do when they got to Cuba. They were in a totally new ecology. What are the powerful? What are the trees here that are manifesting Simbi? What are the trees here that are bringing up the dead, that are making the dead available to me? And I got to know, I mean, obviously big, enormous, gorgeous, magnificent trees make it into the cauldron I was talking about. But some that you would think would make it because the tree is magnificent don't make it because the wood is soft. Like I knew that pine was not going, into my Palo, my Palo repertoire, my Palo apothecary, and pine is too soft. I actually needed to figure out, well, how soft is dogwood? How soft is redbud? The different kinds of oak, is there a hardness, a softness, hickory? It's an entire inquiry into the potential of your ecology when you're uprooted from the place that is your spiritual home. So in my case, that would have been Havana. In the case of Bakongo people, would be, the Congo lowlands around the Delta, and they're brought to Cuba and they're like, okay, gotta figure out where the power is in this ecology.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Just as a side note, I should say that the United States has its own version of Palo, which is not Cuban inspired. It's not from a secondary diaspora from the Caribbean, not from Haiti, not from New Orleans. And that's in the South Carolina Low Country. It's a kind of healing, African-American, dyed-in-the-wool African-American called root work. And so here in North Carolina, we think everything in South Carolina is lowly and not up to our standards. And people are really scared of South Carolina root work. And it is really a very local kind of healing. Like, I don't know any root workers here in Chapel Hill or anywhere around here, but if I've talked to students of mine who've gone on to teach in Charleston, and like, oh, I'll introduce them to a root worker. And so there it is, right? Root, stick, a part of a tree, root in the ground, buried in the ground. The charm work, the kind of healing bundles, so similar to the material culture, to the actual artifacts that I learned to make in Cuba.
The branch from, I assume, the Palo tree or something of that nature is very common in voodoo drumming.
Correct.
But usually it's only one drum with a Palo.
Played with sticks.
Yeah, it's a crooked stick. It has a definite timing and so on. It's very popular.
Thank you, Ted. Did my little dive there into trees and branches and kinds of wood, did that? I couldn't say about Palo Verde, but I tried to answer your question that way.
Yeah, no, that's the connection of the root structure is below ground in the cosmology, and the tree extends above. So the Palo Verde is revered in Arizona, all the desert states down into the northern. I think it extends all the way into South America.
Is it a hardwood, Ted?
Not really.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't come across as a drumming stick.
So if for any of you who've traveled about in Brazil or Haiti or Cuba, there's a very classic sound in secular music, which is this kind of, it's two sticks being hit together. It's not a ringing metallic sound, but it's still a ringing wooden sound. Really hard wood being struck makes a note. Well, you see it in like a xylophone with different lengths of wood, and that wood has to be hard enough to resonate. Ted, I think if when and if Palo finds its way to Arizona, and it starts to find kinship with the spirituality of the desert and the spirituality of that geography, it will be such an interesting moment of cosmological improvisation to figure out a place for Palo Verde in the cosmology.
Interesting, yep. Well, look. Thank you.
All right, any other questions among us? All right, oh, Mary Tomasetti, come on.
Yeah, sorry. I know we're probably gonna wrap it up, but I do have to ask. So the hardwood versus softwood, is that then about the sound that you're going to make with the stick, or is it about the energy of the tree reaching into the ground, or both? Or
It's going to be about the energy. It's interesting, and I've never thought about this, Mary, but the instruments that are played in a Palo gathering are, you can do it with one drum if you're a good enough drummer, and you can play like 2 parts on one drum. But if you got your stuff together, you'll have 3 drums and 3 different drummers, each playing a different part. And then you'll have a bell, like a cowbell. And if you don't have a bell, you'll play a hoe blade, and you'll strike it with something like a railroad spike. And that's going to be it's called the bell, the campana. And it kind of marks time in an abstract way above the drumming and the singing. I've never seen that done with 2 hardwood sticks. You would think, and that seems like I need to take that question to my teachers. Like, why isn't this done with a hard, tropical hardwoods can be so hard. So the answer to your question is those sticks, once they're lodged in the kettle. And for those of you who want to see an example of it, you can grab up Thompson's Flash of the Spirit. I wonder if I can do it in the blink of an eye. I can't. You can grab up Thompson's Flash of the Spirit, and he's got photographs of some of these receptacles I've been talking about. Once they're lodged in there, they're there to stay. And a healer will take scrapings off of those sticks and involve them in bundles, but really just a tiny, like a shaving. So a stick will last forever. A Palo will last forever. And the hardness is very much about the work that Palo does. It's gonna take on your troubles in the most direct way possible, and that's got to be with strong wood. Often your troubles are understood to be caused by another person. Someone who's mistreating you, disrespecting you, getting in your way. Rivals. And when dealing with rivals, Palo wants to bring hardwood, doesn't want to bring softwood. And so that's the hardwood softwood distinction. All wood is going to fall on a spectrum, and a good healer, when they're putting a receptacle together, will know when they've got the softest of the hardwoods. And these things have to be pounded in, and they have to be kind of mistreated to get into this receptacle, and they'll treat the softer ones carefully to make sure they don't sliver them or fragment them. It's very well known what the spectrum is there. Interestingly enough, on the, what should we call it, right, on the negative side, in terms of like, the 21st century Chapel Hill or old lime kind of sensibilities, Palo is masculine, so it brings this hardness and this directness. It genders it. It's going to say that men are faster, stronger, more decisive. Women have other sensibilities and priorities, as these are Palo's values. And sure enough, all these sticks that go into this receptacle are gendered, and the softest among the sticks are feminine. Which, not to say that there aren't really hard sticks that aren't also feminine, but the softest sticks are not masculine sticks.
Mm.
And so there's a whole, masculine priority that accompanies this, this way of being in the world. Mind you, my teacher in all of this work was a woman,
Mhm.
and she was hard.
She seems like a character in both of the books that, yeah, I love the way you write about her. She just seems like a force of nature and, yeah, a total, I don't know, she sings off the page the way you describe her.
Steve, in the little town where, the second book is about, which is her hometown,
Yeah.
she really has a reputation. I don't write much about that, but she is the inheritor of a healing tradition that her mother cultivated for like 60 years. And the book is about her fight with her siblings and half siblings about who's going to get to speak for their mother.
Wow.
And there's no unanimity there, as you know from your own inheritance travails or those of your neighbors that you've heard about. And her choices and the way she goes about fighting for that inheritance. There is a slight material part of that inheritance, which is access to a house, her mother's house in the countryside. But it's more about spiritual privilege. And that's what she's really worked up about. In the course of winning that inheritance fight, which went on for 20 years, for her mother's spiritual mantle, she has a reputation in the town which is split. There are some who see her as a principled, righteous, unrivaled healer, and others who see her as a hard, unyielding, dangerous healer. And she understands that her overall prestige rides on both those things.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Well, listen, we should bring this to a close, but I want to bring it to a close by offering two little tidbits. The first is that when I was in Cuba, we were in a little village called Carlos Roja with a group of paleros. And for whatever reason in that moment, I had this idea. I wanted to bring something back for my teacher, the person I consider to be my teacher, Robert Ferris Thompson. He knew that I was going to Cuba. He was like, you're going to the Holy Land. And I wanted to bring something back. And so I asked these paleros, is there something I might offer him? There's something I might give to him. And indeed, what they offered, I thought it might be I don't know, a cowrie shell or some kind of artwork or something that they had made. But what they chose to offer was a bundle of tiny sticks, palitos. And so so they placed them, these branches, they cut these branches, they placed them on a severed pig's head, let them rest there on the pig's head for several hours while we were there, and then shaved the branches down and just gave me a little bundle of sticks, which I then delivered to Robert Ferris Thompson. So it was really interesting to me that, yes, it was the sticks that were important, not some piece of art, not some object. No, it was the sticks themselves that they wanted to give. So, all right, that's the first thing. The second thing I want to say is that here in Old Lyme and throughout the Northeast, we know that there were trafficked folks from Congo that were brought to the Northeast, as well as to other parts of the Americas. But we know as well that there were some 200 enslaved people here in Old Lyme. And it's likely that there would have been some people with ancestors from Congo that were here in Old Lyme. It's also true that we know that in the Northeast, the places that enslaved people were enabled to practice their rituals were the cemeteries, were the graveyards. We have a graveyard right down the street from our church. I'd like to believe that possibly, maybe, some of the things that you've described to us tonight took place right here. And if they didn't take place right here in Old Lyme, they most certainly took place in other cemeteries here in the Northeast, some variant of some of these traditions that you've described to us so eloquently. So I love the fact that in Cuba, you have this kind of really powerful system that's been maintained for all of these years, but with corollaries all up and down the Americas, and indeed across the Atlantic too in Congo. So I say all of that to say I am so grateful for the opportunity to learn from you, and for your wisdom, for your just all of the stuff that you've just shared with us tonight. It is extraordinary, and I think we're all privileged to be able to hear your talk, your incredible explanations of this tradition, and really to, I don't know, we're privileged to have this introduction to this world that most of us, I think, know very little about. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So everybody unmute, let's give a big round of applause to Todd Ramon Ochoa.
Yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
And Todd, when Haiti calms down again and it's safe to travel, maybe you can come visit us in Haiti.
I would love that. I would love that. In fact, I would love to bring my teacher from Cuba with me.
All right.
That would be
Oh, that's
real,
so cool.
she would love it.
Would she,
Yeah.
would she make the trip though?
Would
Yeah,
she make
well,
it? Sure.
We'll have to wait for things to get a little bit better, but you know, you'll be around a while, I'll be around a while, and we'll just wait.
Let's go for it. Thank
right.
you all for your energy, for your goodwill, for giving these hours. You were just a delight to be with, and I encourage you to keep on reading and keep on learning. And it's a big, big world.
It's
Yeah.
a
Thank you
big
very
world,
much.
but especially, yeah, get on
Yes.
Amazon. Get
That's some reading right now.
Yeah.
Thank you. And also Cars. Don't forget James Cars.
Oh yeah, don't
Yes.
forget James Carter.
Okay.
Finite and
Oh,
Infinite
right, right.
Games.
Right.
Great.
We will get there, but these two, I mean, I can't sing their praises enough. I mean, these are, I don't know many academic books that read as page turners. And I don't know how you managed to do that, but these are books that are hard to put down in many ways. I mean, I find myself just kind of compulsively wanting to read them. And I treat your informants, the people that you're with, as these rich, wonderful characters that, I don't know, I'm certainly they are rich, wonderful characters in real life, but you managed to convey that on the page in a way that I think is really unique and special and delightful. So,
Well,
May I make a,
this was wonderful.
in Haiti, there's the son of a healer who is now gone blind, but there's a very close connection between their herbal medicine and voodoo, and how it creates their world. So that'll be an interesting part of the lesson that you'll bring to us. I know you're going to come.
100%, 100%. And that is certainly, when I think about coming with my teacher, that is like her number one or number two interest is in the herbal lore.
Oh my God.
Yeah, well, we've got people around.
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You sign me up too.
we have just I don't know, maybe you already have the groundwork laid for the next literary production, but maybe we just laid the seeds for the next piece. It's this like
Yeah.
travel, this meeting in Haiti with Isidra. And
It would be just awesome. Let's just hope and, pray that Haiti will settle down.
Next
Because
spring.
it's just so rich and wonderful and fun to be there. We're out in the country. And so, where we are, where our organization is safe. It's just getting there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just getting there.
I think it doesn't happen until she gets there.
Well, I'll get there.
Not you.
You know you can get there. Next
This
year
is-
in Haiti.
We're very close to all of the religious communities, but mostly the background is Rara and a good deal of Palo.
Well, yeah, we don't know. It's not Palo.
It's voodoo.
It's different. It's voodoo.
Yeah, it's
Um,
voodoo.
Congo infused voodoo.
So
Yeah.
maybe this is the travel and group I'm looking at right now. All right, let's do it.
Do it.
I gotta go. I think my meatloaf is burning.
Oh,
It burns.
I'll see you later.
okay.
It's
Bye.
meat
Bye.
cooking. All right. All right.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you
listen,
so
everybody.
much.
Thanks for being a part of this. Thanks for tuning in. But Todd, especially, thank you to you for dedicating a significant part of your Sunday night to a relative group of strangers who are just interested in learning about these traditions. It was incredibly generous of you
Very
to share
welcome.
your knowledge. So thank you. Thank you. Thank
Very
you.
welcome.
I can't thank you enough.
you.